It's 1940, and Britain is getting absolutely curb stomped by the Luftwaffe. They're swiping right on any aircraft manufacturer that can save their bacon. Enter North American Aviation, a company that at the time had as much experience building high-performance fighters as your grandma had piloting them. The British wanted Curtiss P-40s. North American offered a wild idea. Give us a few months and we'll build you something better. Spoiler alert, they did. So what do you get when you give a bunch of engineers 102 days to design a high-altitude, long-range fighter from scratch? The first prototype of the Mustang, that's what. The original version was fitted with an Allison V1710 engine. A decent power plant if you're trying to jog to war, not sprint. Low altitude performance? Great. High altitude? Think clogged nose at 15,000 feet. But then came the Brits with their Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The moment that engine was slapped into the Mustang, angels wept and Luftwaffe pilots started updating their wills. It transformed the P-51 from budget-friendly backup dancer to lead singer that steals the show. Speed? Yes. Range? Unheard of. Altitude? Weaponized. The initial P-51A with the Allison engine was like a really handsome guy who couldn't sing. All looks, limited range. It flew well at low levels, but had the climbing power of a hungover sloth. Still, it was fast, agile, and had potential. It just needed a heart transplant. Which brings us to the British fix-it with Royal Sass. The Brits said, you know what this Yankee Doodle death machine needs? One of our bloody engines. They jammed the Merlin engine into the airframe and boom, the P-51B and C were born. This wasn't just an upgrade, it was an evolution. A Mustang with a Merlin was like giving a shark a jetpack. With a top speed north of 430 miles per hour and the ability to fly over 1,600 miles with drop tanks, this fighter had the range to babysit bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Let's be clear, the P-51 wasn't just a one-trick pony. It could escort bombers, dogfight at high altitudes, strafe ground targets, and still have enough fuel left over to fly home, flirt with a nurse, and write a letter to mom. It was mean, fast, and most importantly, it was everywhere. By the time the war ended, the Mustang wasn't just a plane, it was a statement, a middle finger to the Reich, a steel-winged reply to fascism, and it all started with a rushed idea, a borrowed engine, and the need to build something better than good enough. Once the Mustang proved it could fly like the wrath of God, the real challenge began, building thousands of them without turning every factory into a flaming dumpster. Enter North American Aviation's Los Angeles and Dallas plants, where warbirds were rolled out like hotcakes at a church breakfast. These weren't small shops either. They were aircraft sweatshops with rivet guns. Thousands of Rosie the Riveters cranked out wings, fuselages, and engines like their boyfriends' lives depended on it. Spoiler, they did. Between 1941 and 1945, over 15,000 Mustangs were built. That's about 10 per day for 4 straight years during wartime. You know what else America did during that time? Invented the atomic bomb, sent men across the Atlantic, drank gallons of coffee, still managed to put chrome on everything. The Mustang's life-changing glow-up happened when Packard started building the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine under license. That's right, American factories cranked out British engines, shoved them into American airframes, and then sent them back to Europe to wreck German airfields. The result? A logistical nightmare Hitler didn't plan for. Fast, high-altitude death machines rolling off an assembly line faster than his generals could lose their minds. Each P-51D cost about $51,000 in 1945 dollars. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $850,000 today, or roughly the cost of a moderately tricked out Elon Musk fever dream. For that price, you got a plane that could take out a jet fighter, level a train station, and fly home on fumes. Plus, it came with a guarantee, some assembly required. Results may vary. Not recommended for children under 17. Here's the thing about high-performance war machines. They break. A lot. The P-51's Merlin engine was a screaming metal banshee at altitude and a whining diva on the ground. It guzzled fuel, chewed through spark plugs, and needed babying by ground crews who were basically therapists with wrenches. But it was still more reliable than many other Allied fighters, and a hell of a lot easier to keep flying than the temperamental German Messerschmitt 262 jet. Those poor bastards needed an oil change every time they blinked. The end result of this manufacturing miracle? A plane that could be built by the thousands, fixed by the dozens, and flown by the best. American and British collaboration meant that the Mustang wasn't just a tool, it was a team effort with a kill count. One nation built it, the other improved it, and together they unleashed it. Before the P-51 Mustang showed up, bombing Germany was basically a suicide pact with wings. The US sent squadrons of B-17s and B-24s into the heart of Nazi territory with fighter escorts that could only go halfway. After that, good luck, boys. May your sacrifice be photogenic. Enter the P-51 with drop tanks, the long-range escort fighter Hitler never saw coming, literally, because he was probably hiding in a bunker. The Mustang's first combat sorties over France were the dress rehearsal for the main event, Operation Point Blank, the systematic air murder of Germany's industrial base. Once fitted with the Merlin engine and 165-gallon drop tanks, the P-51 could stick to bombers like a guilt trip from your mother. Now, when the Luftwaffe scrambled their fancy pants Bf-109s and Fw-190s to take a swing at the bomber formations, they found a Mustang already behind them, firing 50 caliber love notes into their tailpipes. Unlike earlier fighters, the P-51 didn't just turn back halfway through. It escorted bombers all the way to the target and back home. A full round trip of flaming flak, dogfights, and crap your pants moments. This broke the Luftwaffe's back. The strategy? Stay above the bomber stream and drop on enemy fighters like a vengeful god. Mustangs hunted the hunters. Once the Luftwaffe realized this, they started staying home, or crashing, or dying. Mostly dying. By mid-1944, Mustangs were scoring air-to-air kill ratios of 11-1 against some of the best pilots Germany had to offer. Think about that. For every Mustang shot down, 11 German fighters went up in smoke. That's not air superiority, that's air tyranny. And it gets worse for them. In March 1944 alone, Mustangs destroyed over 600 German aircraft. At that point, the Luftwaffe was so depleted that German instructors were training new pilots using bicycles and prayer. Even the jet-powered Messerschmitt 262 couldn't escape the Mustang's wrath. Sure, it was fast, but it needed long runways and a 2-week maintenance cycle between flights. Mustangs would just loiter near takeoff strips and ambush them like raccoons at a trash buffet. If the jet didn't explode on takeoff, it got smoked on landing. German bomber crews and fighter pilots alike started cracking. Mustangs didn't just kill planes, they killed morale. Stories spread of invincible American fighters diving from altitude, tearing apart formations, then vanishing into the clouds. To the average Luftwaffe pilot, the Mustang wasn't a plane, it was a winged predator. One moment you're flying, the next you're spinning towards the earth with your wing on fire and a Mustang pilot yelling, "Yee-haw!" in a foreign accent. It's one thing to build a badass plane. It's another to find the lunatics willing to fly it into the heart of Nazi airspace with nothing but some guns, a map, and blind confidence. The P-51 Mustang didn't make legends, it revealed them. These were the pilots who not only rode Mustangs into hell, but made sure hell regretted it. Before he was busting Mach 1 in an orange rocket plane, Chuck Yeager was making Luftwaffe pilots cry into their schnitzel. Flying a P-51D he named Glamorous Glenn, Yeager scored 11.5 kills in World War II, including 5 in a single day. And that half kill? Yeah, he shared a kill with another pilot, because when you're Chuck Yeager, even your assists are legendary. George Preddy racked up 26.83 air-to-air kills. Don't ask me about the decimal. In a Mustang named Cripes a Mighty, he was so effective that he once shot down 6 planes in a single day, basically turning the sky into a shooting gallery. His life ended tragically when he was killed by friendly fire on Christmas Day 1944, because apparently even Santa couldn't stop a trigger-happy anti-aircraft crew. Roscoe Brown flew with the Tuskegee Airmen. That's an awesome name. America's first black military aviators. Flying a red-tailed P-51, he became one of the few Allied pilots to shoot down a German Messerschmitt 262 jet. Think about that. While fighting racism at home, he was also shooting down jet fighters 30,000 feet above Berlin. That's like juggling flaming chainsaws during a marathon. The Tuskegee Airmen as a unit had one of the best escort records in the war. They flew their Mustangs with discipline, precision, and just the right amount of screw you to the segregationists back home. Flying a Mustang wasn't comfy. You sat on a parachute, sweating through wool and leather, with oil fumes in your nose and 50 cal brass casings occasionally bouncing off your knees. If you made it to 20,000 feet, you had ice in your oxygen mask and frost on your eyeballs. Dogfighting at 400 plus miles per hour? It was like playing tag with angry wasps, except the loser explodes. To be an ace, you needed 5 confirmed kills. For Mustang pilots, that was often just a warm-up. These guys would scribble kill markings on the fuselage like it was a scoreboard, and it kind of was. Each mark meant one less Nazi breathing. But don't let the numbers fool you. Every victory came with a risk. The Luftwaffe didn't go down easy, and one wrong move meant bailing out over enemy territory. Best case scenario, captured. Worst case, decorated crater. After racking up kills, some Mustang pilots got pulled from the front lines and paraded around the states to sell war bonds. They became pinup boys with flight jackets. They shook hands, kissed babies, and tried not to think about the friends they left behind in flaming wrecks over France. The pilots made the Mustang feared. Their guts, instincts, and dead-eye aim turned the machine into a weapon of legend. They weren't just flying history, they were writing it in tracer fire. By mid-war, Germany's bombers were the floating turkeys of the sky, slow, lumbering, and stuffed full of regret. The only thing keeping them alive was the fact that American fighters couldn't reach them deep in German airspace. Then the P-51 Mustang arrived, full of long-range Spite and 50 caliber rounds. Suddenly, being in a German bomber was less a job and more a countdown to impact. The P-51 was custom built to ruin bomber squadrons. It was fast enough to catch them, maneuverable enough to hang in formation long enough to line up a shot, and armed with 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns that turned aluminum into coleslaw. Once the Mustangs were in the mix, Luftwaffe bombers started dropping like disco careers in the 80s. Ironically, while Mustangs were assigned to protect bombers, they often made their biggest dent away from them, when peeling off to hunt down enemy interceptors or catch bombers on their way home. By staying in the air longer and hitting harder, Mustangs could engage German planes on both legs of their mission. You could run, but eventually you'd be alone, out of fuel, and staring down a Mustang's 6-pack of death. Starting in 1944, Germany began launching V-1 flying bombs, early cruise missiles with all the charm of a lawnmower duct taped to a pipe bomb. These things buzzed across the English Channel, delivering chaos and poorly aimed vengeance. Mustangs became the ultimate interceptors, racing to catch V-1s mid-flight. The kill methods include shooting them down, or, if you are feeling particularly cocky, tipping them mid-air with a wing to send them tumbling. Yes, Mustang pilots literally pushed missiles out of the sky. The P-51 wasn't just a menace in the clouds. It was also a lawnmower of doom. Once air superiority was achieved, Mustangs shifted to ground attack roles, turning train stations, convoys, and airfields into craters. They'd come screaming in low, guns blazing, and then disappear before the flak crews could finish yelling, "Scheibe!" Mustangs didn't just shoot down planes. They destroyed the infrastructure that made them. They strafed factories, truck convoys, and anything else the Luftwaffe needed to function. German aces weren't just outnumbered, they were being hunted while still in training. The Mustang became so dominant that by 1945, the Luftwaffe was training new pilots in gliders because they didn't have enough working aircraft left to practice on. The fighter-bomber role let pilots unleash their inner chaos gremlin. They weren't just defending, they were punishing. You're bored flying escort duty? Great. Go napalm a train yard, bomb a bridge, light up a retreating convoy like it insulted your mother. When the skies belonged to the Mustang, everything below became target practice. Let me be clear, the P-51 Mustang was a game changer, but no warbird is perfect, and the Mustang came with its own bag of mechanical neuroses, operational quirks, and good old-fashioned please don't kill me limitations. Let's unpack the parts the recruiters left out. First up, the landing gear. Narrow track, fragile, and about as stable as a politician's opinion. It was notorious for collapsing under stress, especially on muddy airfields or if a pilot landed just a little too spicy. Ground crews prayed every time a Mustang came in for a landing. Some planes gracefully touched down, others turned into overpriced lawn darts. Yes, the P-51 was a long-range monster with drop tanks. Strip those off and you were suddenly flying a much shorter trip. Kind of like bragging your car has a 1,000-mile range if you tow a gas truck behind it. Pilots would often jettison drop tanks before entering combat, meaning the return flight home got real sweaty if the battle ran long. The Mustang wasn't built to soak up damage like a B-17. It was light, fast, and nimble, which meant armor was minimal. One lucky flak burst or cannon hit could shred a wing, puncture a fuel tank, or send the pilot straight to the afterlife at 400 miles per hour. The cockpit had some armor plating and a bullet-resistant windshield, but this wasn't a flying tank. It was more like a sword, sharp and deadly, but don't drop it. Mustangs had a rough time with the anti-aircraft fire. Strafing runs, while glorious, turned those sleek killing machines into very shootable targets. Every Mustang pilot knew the risk. Come in low, come in fast, and if you hear boom, pray you eject somewhere that isn't on fire. Also trees. Turns out hitting one at 300 miles per hour is a bad time. The Merlin engine was glorious in the air and a complete diva on the ground. It needed constant maintenance, top-tier fuel, and a crew that knew what the hell they were doing. Mistune the mixture and it would cough, sputter, and die like it just realized it was drafted. Oil changes were frequent, spark plugs were like candy, and fuel consumption at combat power, well, don't ask. The Mustang flew beautifully until it didn't. Mishandle the stick and it could snap into a stall fast enough to make your life insurance agent sweat. Recovery was possible, but not guaranteed if you were already at low altitude. It rewarded skill and punished overconfidence, like a jealous ex with a license to kill. And of course there was this. No matter how good the Mustang was, the enemy got a vote. A lucky shot, a flak burst, a mid-air collision, anything could end the ride. Even the best Mustang pilots didn't always come home. In the end, the Mustang wasn't flawless, but it didn't have to be. It just had to be good enough, fast enough, deadly enough to dominate the skies. And on most days, it was. Give a 20-year-old a high-performance warplane, 1,880 rounds of 50 cal ammo, and a gallon of boredom, and you'll end up with nose art. It wasn't sanctioned, it wasn't subtle, but it became one of the most enduring cultural artifacts of World War II. The P-51 Mustang wasn't just a fighter, it was a flying billboard, and the nose was prime advertising real estate for pinups, puns, and personal statements on war, women, and mortality. Originally, identification. In the chaos of massed airfields and near-identical aircraft, visual markings helped ground crews and pilots recognize their own machines. But almost immediately, it evolved into something else: defiance, humor, and morale. Command turned a blind eye because the art gave pilots a sliver of control in a war where most choices were made for them. One of the most iconic forms of nose art, the snarling shark mouth, wasn't born with the Mustang, it was adopted. The origin traces back to No. 112 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force, flying Curtiss P-40 Tomahawks in North Africa. Inspired by German Bf-110 Zeristers of ZG-76, which carried shark mouths in 1940, the Australians applied the design in 1941, bold-fanged and aggressive. When the Flying Tigers, American volunteer group, adopted the same art on their P-40s in China, it cemented the shark mouth as aviation iconography. By the time the P-51s entered the war, squadrons like the 23rd Fighter Group and others had adopted the teeth, more for intimidation and tradition than camouflage. It wasn't just paint, it was a message. This plane bites back. There seem to be 4 other categories for nose art: pinup girls, Betty Grable, Rita Hayworth, or an original creation in limited clothing and zero anatomical realism. Puns and wordplay, Old Crow, Creamer's Dream, Passion Wagon, and My Achin' Back. Some flirted, some threatened, some were just nonsense. Scare tactics, grinning skulls, demon faces, and death's hand served one purpose: to make the enemy's last sighting terrifying. Symbols of home, wives, hometowns, mascots, even mom's apple pie, all immortalized in enamel on aluminum. The art didn't come from the factory, it came from the hands of fellow soldiers. Enlisted crewmen with artistic training or natural talent became unofficial unit painters. One of the most famous was Tony Starcer, who painted the Memphis Belle and many others. Supplies were improvised, paint was scrounged, brushes stolen or handmade, and canvases were curved sheet metal that vibrated like a tuning fork. Officially, risque or vulgar artwork violated U.S. Army Air Force regulations, but in practice, enforcement was inconsistent. As long as the plane flew and didn't spark a diplomatic incident, most commanding officers looked the other way. Later in the war, regulations became stricter, and some artwork had to be covered or scrubbed. Pilots worked around this by using coded language or innocent-sounding names for otherwise suggestive art. Big Beautiful Doll, a P-51D flown by Colonel John Landers, known for its sleek script and classic red checkerboard tail. Old Crow, Clarence Bud Anderson's Mustang, simple lettering, deadly results. Petite Second, named for pilot J.J. England's wife, sentimental and lethal. Today, nose art survives in museums, air shows, and restoration projects. Some Mustangs still carry their original artwork, painstakingly recreated. The shark mouth lives on in everything from A-10 Warthogs to pilot helmets, a lineage that began with Australians in the desert and found its place on America's most feared fighter. Nose art was rebellion with a brush, a coping mechanism, a middle finger to the grave. And it made damn sure the last thing some enemies ever saw was unforgettable. When people talk about the P-51 Mustang, they usually picture it ripping through Europe, slapping Messerschmitts out of the sky like Nazi mosquitoes. But the Mustang also did a little side work in the Pacific, and it wasn't just phoning it in. Think of it as the warplane equivalent of a world-class sniper picking up some freelance work as a demolition expert. By 1944, the Pacific Theater was a non-stop, island-hopping slog, and the U.S. needed a long-range escort for B-29 bombers headed for Japan. The Mustang, with its ridiculous range and speed, fit the bill after you cleared enough runway on some volcano-infested coral outpost. Bases like Iwo Jima became crucial, not for their beaches, but for their airstrips. Capture an island, slap down a metal mat runway, and suddenly you had a Mustang motel. Flying from Iwo Jima, P-51s began escorting B-29s over Japan. That's over 1,500 miles of round-trip flying across shark-infested water into heavily defended airspace in a single-seat fighter with no autopilot and a bladder the size of a coffee cup. Welcome to the Mustang pilot's Pacific nightmare, cramped, gassy, and full of existential dread. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was still lurking in the skies, And while it was nimble, it was also made out of tinfoil and dreams. In a dogfight, a Zero could outturn a Mustang, but only until it got hit. Then it transformed into flaming confetti. Mustangs would boom and zoom Zeros, dive in from altitude, fire a burst, and climb away before the lightweight fighters could even react. It wasn't always easy, but it was usually deadly. In the Pacific, Mustangs also took on ground attack roles. That meant napalm runs, strafing enemy positions, and occasionally leveling entire patches of jungle just in case. Japanese forces hiding in caves? The P-51 dropped its payload, flipped around, and gave them a bonus strafing run for good measure. And if the first pass didn't work, that's why God made second passes. Tropical storms, sudden squalls, and blinding sun. Pacific weather was chaos on a timetable. Pilots would take off under blue skies and land in monsoons. Fuel gauges lied, clouds formed out of nowhere, and visibility about the length of a good curse word. Maintenance crews worked in humidity thick enough to drink, trying to keep high-performance Merlins from choking on the air. The Pacific Mustang pilots didn't get as much screen time, but their missions were brutal. Long hours, hostile terrain, and almost zero margin for error. A flame out over open ocean meant your new home was a rubber raft and a flare gun. Still, they made the difference. Bombers reached targets, Zeros got shredded, and Japan learned that air superiority had arrived, and it was pissed off. When World War II ended, the P-51 Mustang had racked up a kill count that would make a slasher villain jealous. But what do you do with thousands of high-performance warplanes when there are no Nazis left to shoot? Mustangs were suddenly flooding the market. One day they were million-dollar war machines, the next you could buy one for less than a new Chevy. It was like watching Ferraris getting sold at garage sales. Just when the Mustang thought it was headed for retirement, the Korean War said, "Not so fast." Jets like the F-86 Sabre may have ruled the skies, but early in the war, there weren't enough to go around. So the Air Force pulled the old war horses out of the barn, slapped on some new paint, and dropped them into Korea. In this new theater, the Mustang wasn't the elegant escort anymore. It was a mud-splattered, close air support thug, strafing Chinese troops and bombing bridges like it was mad about being demoted. Turns out, even in the jet age, 50 cals still hurt. The US started selling or giving away P-51s to allied nations. Suddenly Mustangs were popping up in Latin America, Africa, and Asia for flying regimes, rebels, and sometimes whichever pilot sobered up first. Countries like Indonesia, Bolivia, and the Dominican Republic all operated Mustangs at one point. Some saw combat, some sat on runways. One was allegedly used to smuggle drugs. We're not saying the P-51 was a war criminal, but let's just say it had a few questionable gigs. By the 1950s and 60s, Mustangs were getting hot-rodded for racing. Stripped of armor, polished like chrome peacocks, and fitted with tuned-up engines, these machines tore across pylons at Reno with one goal: go fast or blow up trying. Some racers pushed 500+ miles per hour. With mods so extreme, the FAA just kinda shrugged. These weren't military operations anymore. They were mechanical daredevils on wings. Surviving Mustangs became the darling of the airshow circuit. Crowds would gather to hear the roar of the Merlin engine one more time. A sound so iconic, it's basically the scream of freedom. Restored warbirds toured the world, flown by aging vets or rich collectors with more patriotism than sense. Every surviving Mustang became part museum, part memorial, part middle finger to time itself. You've seen the Mustang in every World War II movie ever made. It's the sleek fighter that shows up just in time to save the day. Whether accurate or not, the P-51 became cinematic shorthand for America wins. And let's be honest, it looks damn good on camera. Today, fewer than 300 Mustangs are still airworthy, But each one is a piece of history with a turbocharger. Whether flying over baseball games or being tucked into climate-controlled hangars, these planes are reminders that some legends don't fade. They just throttle down for a bit. The P-51 Mustang didn't just win a war. It became a symbol of American industrial might, of Allied air superiority, and of exactly how much trouble you're in when a nation builds a sports car with guns. But what exactly did it leave behind? Let's break down the myth, the facts, and the weird aftershocks. Was it the best fighter of World War II? Yes. Next question. Okay, fine. The P-51 wasn't perfect, but in terms of range, speed, climb, armament, and kill ratio, it ticked all the boxes. Other planes did specific jobs better. The Spitfire could outturn it, the F-6F Hellcat dominated the Pacific, and the FW-190 looked like a flying anvil with rabies. But the P-51 could do everything, and do it almost anywhere. It escorted bombers, won dogfights, blew up trains, and still had gas left to write postcards home. It wasn't just good, it was strategic. It turned the tide in Europe by not being flashy, but being relentless. The Mustang arrived at the end of the propeller era, but left a deep impression on jet development. Engineers and pilots alike took notes. The streamlined design, laminar flow wings, cockpit ergonomics, these features became blueprints for the early jet age. Even the U.S. Air Force's early jets borrowed the Mustang's spirit, fast, sleek, and merciless. No contest, a modern F-22 Raptor would shoot down a P-51 from 5 miles away using AI, radar, and whatever flavor of laser cannon they're cooking up next. But that's not the point. You don't measure legends by who they can beat today. You measure them by how they change the game. And the Mustang changed everything. Want to see a grown man cry? Let him hear a Merlin engine fire up on a Sunday morning. Air shows across the world still feature Mustangs, and every time one screams by at 200 feet, it's like 1944 all over again, minus the flak. These planes aren't just flying, they're testaments to a time when speed, skill, and a little spray paint on the nose could change history. Restoring a P-51 today is a financial black hole with wings. Parts are rare, engines are finicky, and mechanics need to speak fluent World War II. But people still do it, because legends deserve to fly. Some collectors spend millions just to get one airborne. Others dedicate their lives to keeping a single Mustang running like it's still 1945. The P-51's engine note is unmistakable. Pilots call it the freedom scream. Civilians call it, "Dear God, what was that?" Germans used to call it, "Incoming!" When you hear it, you don't think airplane, you think history. You think of bombers turning for home, dogfights over Berlin, and a time when good and evil had propellers. The P-51 Mustang isn't just a plane, it's an artifact, a reminder that when humanity is at its worst, someone will build something capable of extraordinary good, or, at the very least, extraordinary vengeance. It represents innovation under pressure, teamwork across nations, and the ability to slap a war machine together in 3 months that still flies 80 years later. So here's to the Mustang, the winged nightmare, the escort angel, the loud, lethal, glorious SOB that helped end a war and still refuses to shut up. The P-51 Mustang was born in desperation, raised in fire, and retired in glory. It came into this world as a rush design for a foreign country and left it as the most iconic American warplane ever built. Not bad for something drawn up in 3 months by engineers with a caffeine problem. The Mustang wasn't just another plane, it was the plane. It escorted bombers through flak storms, turned enemy aces into cautionary tales, and gave Allied pilots the confidence to go deep into enemy airspace and still expect to come back. Its 50 cals didn't just shoot down aircraft, they erased threats. Its long range didn't just extend missions, it shortened wars. And its silhouette didn't just become famous, it became feared. If you've ever heard a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine at full throttle, you understand. It's not just noise, it's the sound of 1,000 stories, of steel and sweat and second chances. It's a reminder that someone out there once bet their life on that sound and won. Modern pilots say the Mustang doesn't fly you into the past, it drags the past into the present, screaming like a banshee and looking for trouble. The P-51 may no longer fight wars, but it still fights time. Every surviving Mustang that takes to the skies is a reminder that engineering, bravery, and a healthy dose of attitude can change the world. So the next time you see one bank overhead, know this: you're looking at more than aluminum and rivets. You're looking at a monument that flies, a war story that never ends, a machine built to win and to be remembered. Because some legends fade, others throttle up, lean into the sun, and dare history to forget them. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please consider subscribing. And until next time, stand tall.